I didn't get a chance to do a live review for AEW Collision this past Saturday, but I want to spend a couple minutes with you guys and tell you my overall thoughts and genuine opinions and impressions that I had when watching the show. Now, if you watch my content before, I talk about the time slot, and before I could tell you my overall opinion on the show, I got to be very transparent with you guys. No matter how good or bad a show is, if the time slot simply doesn't work for you, it's a lot harder to watch. And that's the beauty of DVR. But in terms of tuning in live, Friday Night SmackDown, AEW Collision, I don't like those time slots. And I'm not saying AEW has to change their whole strategy or WWE has to change their whole strategy, but ideally for me in the summer, Friday and Saturday nights, it just simply doesn't work. And I feel like that's not going to change in the summer. No matter how good or bad the show is, that's not really going to change. Now, granted, yes, DVR exists and everything like that, so you can always go back and watch it. It's not really hard to be in tune with wrestling if you can't watch a show. Social media, DVR, there's a lot of ways to watch the show. But just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it won't work for you. So if you guys like the time slot and stuff like that, good, obviously. Winter, fall season, once it gets cold out, probably won't be an issue for me. Truth be told, I thought Collision was actually really good. I thought it looked and felt different from every other AEW produced show. And I talk about that a lot because one of my big complaints about WWE and Raw and SmackDown, right? When you look at WWE, they got the same presentation. They got the same type of graphics. They got the same type of, LEDs. And Collision has the same set that they essentially used for, I think it was Double or Nothing. Very, very similar set. Now, to be honest with you, I think a lot of people get the impression. I wanted something different. I wanted something simplistic, less LED, something a little bit more intimate. AEW chose to do the opposite. They're trying to make it look big time. Just because I wanted something and didn't get that thing doesn't mean I don't like it or I hate it. It does feel big time. Actually, I feel like Collision's branding and presentation actually looked bigger time, way bigger than Dynamite. I felt like, and I put this out on a tweet, I feel like AEW Collision is everything that Dynamite should have looked like when they first started, because that is literally how great of a difference it felt. And that's really a credit to the production team and everybody who was planning the expansion of the product. But ultimately, the first thing that stuck out to me in such a big way was it felt different, right? And it's not just the presentation or the branding or the colors and stuff. Obviously, I'm sure that has a lot to do with it, but it felt like the show in terms of booking and in terms of the matches we were seeing, in terms of the pace, everything just felt a little bit more organic, maybe less rushed. I felt like things were really done in a way to settle in and kind of get you emotionally invested. And, look, the reality is we could sit here and talk about booking, and obviously it's subjective. Personally speaking, when you see that CM Punk comes out and does the promo, I thought that was a wonderful way to open up Collision. It was a wonderful way for CM Punk to address in a weird, nonchalant way why he's been gone and kind of like, just kind of set the tone for what Collision is going to be. I thought that was a great promo. But then we get the TNT Championship match, right? And again, booking and everything is subjective. You guys are going to dislike things. You're going to agree, disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm really at a loss for words with AEW and the way they booked the TNT Championship and the way they've actually handled Wardlow's career. I think a lot of people are trying to revise history. But if you go back and look at Wardlow when he was with MJF and that chase of getting to the top, it seemed like Wardlow was the guy in AEW, and it seemed like they were kind of building him up for that spot. And for whatever reason, the back and forth with the TNT Championship, that for me is a booking decision. Overall, I feel like maybe there's a lack of vision there. I don't know what it is, but that was like the only thing I didn't like. And that really came down to the booking perspective, right? But of course, there's going to be a story there. We're seeing Luchasaurus, which, by the way, I really like Luchasaurus, so I'm not even mad that he's holding the belt. We saw Christian celebrate with the belt. Luchasaurus didn't even get to celebrate with the belt. So there is something there, and that really comes down to booking. I think you can agree that Wardlow has been misbooked, but I think you can also agree that they are planting the seed for another story, and you got to be in tune with what's happening to see it unfold. And I think that's really the cool thing about what's happening right now with Christian, at the very least. I don't think they're connected, right? I think Wardlow's not been booked well, But at the same time, too, on the flip side of that, the decision that they made could lead to something really cool. And I did like the fact that very quickly, by having Wardlow drop the belt, they are planting the seed for a story. And I love that. I love getting emotionally invested into stories, and AEW did that. But that wasn't the only thing that they did, right? We saw a very, very great match between Andrade and Buddy Matthews. And immediately after Andrade wins, which, by the way, both of them doing Rhea and Charlotte's finishing moves. Great stuff there. Nice little tribute to them. But what you see in that match is that Andrade and Buddy Matthews had this great match right after House of Black comes out. And honestly, I genuinely thought, I was like, wow, maybe they're going to have Andrade join House of Black, which I wouldn't be against it, right? If there's a purpose to it, I always talk about purpose. I can work with that, right? Like we'll see how it goes, obviously. Got to be willing to give things a chance. But I really like the fact that they planted the seed, because obviously we saw Brody King attack Andrade. And again, this was a match that was announced for the show, but and you're always going to have the people on the internet, they're like, where's the story? It's not about where's the story. It's where's the progression? What is this leading to? What is the purpose of this? That's what matters. You can have random matches, but what is it going to lead to? And then how are you going to follow up on that? And how are you going to progress that mission? And I like that about AEW with this match, right? To me, I feel like we obviously have something very special in the works for Andrade. Maybe it's a trios run, right? Maybe we're going to see Andrade with Rush and Dralistico. Like, maybe that's a possibility, right? So they already planted a seed there. I thought the women's match was great. Sky Blue, Willow Nightingale. Obviously, that's a continuation from a story that's been happening on Dynamite, but I thought that was great. Overall, the show was very, very well paced. And then there becomes this major argument on social media about Jay White and Bullet Club Gold, obviously with Samoa Joe against CM Punk and CMFTR, right? We get the 6-man tag. And I see a lot of people are complaining. They're like, they didn't do anything on the debut episode to hook people in. And I feel like so many people have gotten so used to the idea that AEW is going to have surprise after surprise after surprise that they were genuinely shocked that AEW didn't deliver a surprise. And I understand the argument, right? Like, I think it's a very fair assessment for people to say, well, AEW didn't do anything to hook you into the next episode. And again, I totally get that. And I totally think that's a fair assessment. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But also at the same time, too, from a perspective of somebody who is invested into storylines and progression and character progression, me personally, I can only speak on my perspective. I'm not here to speak for others. I'm here to speak on my perspective. I feel like AEW delivered an episode of Collision that makes me very intrigued to see what they do next with Collision. And I think part of that is because of the fact that, yes, it is the new show, right? Just like when Rampage started, I watched the first few episodes of Rampage. I was bought in. A lot of people seem to actually forget. It got to a point where I liked Rampage more than Dynamite, right? Because of the pace and the matches and some of the storylines that were happening on there. It was just way easier to consume and way more easier to get invested in. But eventually we saw Rampage run its course, and then it just kind of became meaningless. So I think partially I'm interested in the future episodes of Collision to see if they go that same route. But based on what they gave me on the first episode, I don't feel like it's going to be another Rampage. I don't. I think Collision could very much stand on its own, despite the fact that I said in the beginning of the video, right? The time slot might not work for me, things like that. But just because I can't watch it live doesn't mean I can't watch it on DVR, right? So obviously there is a lot of good that can come from Collision, but I think the biggest thing that AEW needs to do is truly go into a mode where they are so focused on just continuation. You have Rampage, Dynamite, and Collision. There should be no excuses of not putting people on TV on a week-to-week basis, not following through with stories. That's it. And I thought this was a solid episode of AEW. I really thought it was good. I thought it felt different. It looked different. It seemed like, honestly, like, and I'm just kind of like throwing this out there, it seems like whoever is working on Collision's creative team probably is different from Dynamite's. because that's how much of a different feel it had. Now, again, you can argue about booking. I see some people are like, the Acclaimed segment shouldn't have been on there, whatever. And obviously that's all subjective, but I felt like my overall impression was Collision could very well be the show that I have the most interest in with AEW because of the people that they could potentially have on there. And, one thing too that I didn't mention was the video package of Scorpio Sky. And I think that's another important thing to bring up. Scorpio Sky, if you watch my old videos, you guys know I've said it, and I always kind of feel bummed out about it, but I always said Scorpio Sky to me is a world championship kind of guy on AEW, and some people will obviously disagree, and that's fine. You guys can choose who you like and who you don't like or whatever, but Scorpio Sky has always been one of those guys where even when he was in SCU, I would just think, like, this guy could be a singles guy, and he could be a top singles guy. And then, obviously, when everything happened with him and Dan Lambert and the TNT Championship, it all just kind of unfolded, and then there was, like, some injury stuff. But they did the video package there, and again, it's just, like, progression and getting you excited. And a lot of these things that I'm talking about that Collision did, those are the things that I like about WWE and the things that I like about Impact, right? So, obviously, when I see it being across all three of those shows, I'm going to like it. And when I don't see it on TV on one of those shows, I'm probably not going to like it. But I thought it was a really good episode, honestly. And I felt like Collision, people, you're going to have more noise on social media, people talking about ratings and attendance and this and that. But I make my point very clear. A show can have good ratings or bad ratings. A show could have sold out crowd or not sold out crowd. Those numbers should not dictate what you personally thought of the show. I don't see a correlation between numbers and your personal, like, if you're entertained by something, the numbers may or may not be in favor of how you were entertained. And I think wrestling fans have, this show didn't do 1 million viewers. This show didn't do that. They didn't have a sold out crowd. And then when they get to that point, when they get into that perspective of things, I think they're forgetting what they're actually supposed to be judging the product on, which is whether or not they're into it. That's why I tell people all the time, you can have 5-star matches, 6-star matches, flips, this, that, and, like, that's cool. And I definitely have a side of me that likes that. But to sit there and actually be invested about it and, like, truly love it and truly enjoy it and truly want to go and buy pay-per-view tickets or buy the pay-per-views and do things like that, I care about the characters. I care about the in-ring matches. I care about the Easter eggs. I care about so much more than just the wrestling moves. And the reason that I say this is because I think there is a correlation where you can have a really good story and a match with really good moves. And I think you can see that the matches and the storylines that I enjoy the most wasn't necessarily the most incredible 10, 50-star match, whatever you want to say, but it had an element in the match that made me invested to see what would happen. Sometimes that includes 450 splashes and triple backflips and 650s and 630s and 720s, whatever. Maybe it has that, but maybe it doesn't. But for me to be the most invested, I look at it from a perspective of what is drawing me in. And I feel like if AEW wants, they can have Rampage have the super crazy indie matches, right? Dynamite and Collision should be both, right? And I think that could be a winning recipe for them. But we'll see. I understand why people aren't as excited for the episode 2 of Collision because they wanted a big hook or a big surprise or maybe a heel turn or whatever it may be. I feel like they did enough where they didn't have to surprise me. I feel like people have become immune to surprises in wrestling. So the less surprises you get, once you get that big surprise, you're going to be hooked. And maybe they save that for next week. Maybe they save that for another week. But I thought this was good. I thought this was really good. I hope they follow up with this. I hope we see some continuation with the House of Black and Andrade. I hope we see a lot more. And obviously with Christian and Wardlow and what happens next, it intrigues me. It does. It was good. Very good episode. So yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. We'll see where they go from there. And should be fun. Thanks for watching.